OAN. Thank you, sir. Also, Mr. Hakrit Singh, Global Head of Solutions and Head of Africa for Tata Communications Transformation Services. And last but certainly not least, the Director General for Smart Africa, Mr. Lassina Kone. Thank you, sir. So I get the distinct honor of holding court here and had a chance to speak to our panelists around this issue and the ongoing work that's going on. Just to set the scene a little bit, when we think about the backbone of connectivity, we're thinking about high-speed data. That is the promised land of digital data transmission lines that provide networking facilities for other ISPs and others to connect to. And fundamentally, they are data routes, and they are built on ubiquity, affordability, ideally, and also that they are reliable and provide the security backbone and secure backbone for us to even delve into the digital economy. And when we think about the kind of requirements for this, we want high-speed bandwidth, we want high-performance servers and routers. And that's just the technical piece, but the economic and societal impacts, and the argument there is that even when we build in the systems and the backbone connectivity, we can see with a 10% increment in broadband penetration for many developing countries, that can constitute approximately 1.4% in GDP growth. And that makes the difference for every citizen living on the continent and beyond. It means that they have access to the important services and voice and everything that we need for the digital economy. And it also means that we can tap into the currently $1 trillion digital economy market, which is set to grow to in 2021 to almost 15% of the world's GDP. Now, what's the role that Africa can do within this? That's the conversation that we have broadly at Transform Africa. So let's start, and it would be great to start with Director General. Given all of this, why do we fundamentally need an Intra Africa, specifically, a backbone connectivity? Why is it important?
Thank you very much for your questions. Let's step back for a second. In the world, 51% of the world populations are connected. So 51% out of 7 billion. That left with a 49% unconnected. If you combine the satellite capacity around the world, if you combine it with a submarine cable, you combine it with a fiber, the coverage of the Earth is more than 95%. So what's the problem? Why Africa still remains the most expensive continent in terms of internet access? It's very simple. It is because Africa is left behind in terms of intra-Africa connectivity. But why intra-Africa connectivity? There has to be a mechanism of actually putting a soft pressure on the cost of the internet access in Africa by actually interconnecting ourselves among ourselves. And We all talk about the internet today. What is the internet? The internet, we see it real time. When you browse something, you see it real time. But what's really happening behind? It is semi-real time. I will explain this technically. What does that mean? The internet is an aggregation of many servers deployed around the world, where they call them cache servers. An example, if you're in Nigeria, if there was a cache server in Nigeria, the first time you type to go to a website, the first time it comes to the cache server is Nigeria. When you go offline, the server gets updated automatically, even if you don't ask. So the next morning, if you go back to the same source, it's actually refreshed. If that is the case, why don't we deploy many servers of the internet in Africa? Because that particularly, it reduced the tensions of access on the submarine cable, which is making the internet more expensive in Africa. Look at the disparity between the price of the internet access in Africa. I'm not going to go into any figures. We all know that, I know for a fact that coming from Cote d'Ivoire, the internet is cheaper twice in Ghana than Cote d'Ivoire. Similar population, 20, 30 million, same demography, same density. What explained that? It brings me to the second question, the regulatory issue. We need to harmonize between our regulatories, access to the internet. Accessing to the internet from African should not be a luxury. It is a necessity, just like electricity and water. This is if we want to be the driver for our own destiny in this fourth industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we'll get to regulation a little bit later when we talk about the role of government agencies and others as well. And as you said, in terms of data, and also to get that data through those submarine cables, kind of landing points, and it takes then it takes to even get it to the US and Europe. So the incentives need to be built out for an intra Africa connectivity approach. There has been progress made, right? I mean, we acknowledge that there's been progress made. There's almost a million kilometers of cable that has been laid. But it's still only reaching about, I think, in a conversation yesterday, 50% of African people are more than 25 kilometers away from fiber. Yeah. And it's almost, I think it's even less than 8 or 6 kilometers, excuse me, that for Europe or even for the US especially. So I want to get to a little bit more, because a lot of the partnerships that we see between the governments of Guinea and Sierra Leone in partnership with private sector, represented with Tata, and with Smart Africa, are addressing these issues. And I will come back to you, DG, but I want to first talk to some of the champions for some of this work as well. And what does that mean in terms of making these particular initiatives more ubiquitous across the continent? So in terms of that, how can we achieve that goal of interconnecting all of Africa? And what is the time frame for doing this? We have some champions, obviously, but there are 55 countries. There are many others who are part of Smart Africa 24, I believe. And so
26.
26.
25 now officially with the Sierra Leone.
Well, that's good to know. So how can we achieve this? And I want to first start with Honourable Minister Mami, if I can, to talk about the goal of interconnecting all of Africa in real practical ways that you have seen through that work.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the Smart Africa Secretariat for organizing this panel to let us discuss and present what we're doing within the continent and what is happening. Because our brothers coming out of Africa should know that good things are happening in Africa. My brother Lassina was saying yesterday, it's good to do, but it's also good to inform, let people know what you're doing. We are talking about services, applications, data. As a government, before we talk about services, because you can deliver service only through an infrastructure, African countries should develop national infrastructure to reach all the citizens, to bridge the gap between urban and rural areas. We're talking about domesticating the African traffic. You can do that only if African countries are interconnected one to another. Because today, if I want to call my brother minister from Sierra Leone, I don't know where the call is going through. It may go from Guinea to Paris, then from Paris to London, London and Sierra Leone. There's time, there's a delay, there's a problem on the quality of service. There's also the money to be paid. And part of the money that I'm paying by calling my brother to say, who is in Sierra Leone, part of that money is collected out of the continent, which is billions of dollars that Africans, by calling each other, are spending out of the continent. That's why we do believe that we African countries, not only the Smart Africa member countries, because when we're talking about African interconnectivity, we need to go beyond the Smart Africa member states. We need to make sure we interconnect our different countries, put the minimum infrastructure like the internet, the national, regional, and continental internet exchange point, data centers, because applications need to be within data centers. It's only when you have your own data centers, you develop your applications that you can start securing services, applications, and protect personal data. This is the way we think that we're going to do it. In terms of time frame, it's difficult to give a time frame when we're talking about 55 countries. But what we have done a study within 24 countries plus 9. This is 33. We have started the implementation. The implementation between Guinea and Sierra Leone has started. We're implementing the interconnection between Guinea and Mali. And very soon we will start interconnecting Guinea and Senegal, Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire, and go to Guinea-Bissau and Liberia. If you know the continent, once you are in Mali, it's easy for you to jump and go to Niger. And once you are in Niger, you have Burkina Faso next door, Chad. In Chad, you just need to cross the river. You are in Central Africa, and then go to the two Congos. So I will not say that it will be easy to cover the whole continent, but we are committed, and I know that my brothers, the ministers, ladies, brothers and sisters, because now we have more female ministers, we are all committed. And as chairman of the Ministerial Council, my first commitment is to make this happen. And I know that I can count on all of them, and we want it to be done. And I invite you to Conakry next year. I'm quite sure you will see that at least 5 to 10 countries are interconnected. This is a commitment, and you can quote me on it. Thank you.
Well, we can call him on that. Yeah. So thank you, sir. I'd like to move to Honourable Minister Soare. You are also a champion of this work. And would like to get your thoughts on it, especially in terms of the recent deployment in Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much for organizing this panel. It's quite a good opportunity to come to terms with the challenges facing our continent. We have had so many arguments in the past about the fact that Africa is one united, indivisible continent. It was divided by colonial masters and all of this. Now is the time for Africa to rise up and be counted. So, I mean, the whole philosophy of interconnecting countries is simple, like my colleague champion, Honorable Jabi, just mentioned. Africa wants to avail herself the opportunities of a wider market, a larger market, where Africans could play around and create more opportunities for themselves, their innovators, and the general commerce environment. So, as it is now, Sierra Leone and Guinea have gone a long way. Studies have gone on. Discussions are going on with a view to eventually interconnect those two countries, which will bring boundless opportunities to both countries. I now look at the market. Guinea has a population of about 18 million people, right? 12. About 12 million people. 12 million people plus our 7.3 million people is about 20 million people. So you are creating a market that is as large as 20 million. Two small countries, but that is larger than the two individual countries standing alone on their own. So this is what we have. And we are very irrevocably committed to ensuring that this process continues. Already, we had conversations here yesterday with the Director General of our regulators, and they have committed their bit of everything to ensure that this connection works. One thing I can assure is that in the next few months, this will be a shining example to other African countries to know that indeed this is the way to go, and there is strong political will. You mentioned other issues around the backbone, the fiber. We are a small country. We have a current deployment of about 1,010 kilometers of fiber in country, which basically is backbone. Backbone alone cannot do the trick. We want to be able to deliver services to our people. So as I speak, we are in advanced stages of discussions to deploy an additional 700 kilometers of fiber, which will enable us to do metro rings around most of our provincial headquarter towns, and en route, along the route of those fiber deployments, will connect all schools, hospitals, and other basic essential services within to ensure that we're able to deliver last-mile solutions to our people. So that is the current state of Sierra Leone's fiber situation and the interconnect you just mentioned.
Thank you. And you mentioned that backbone alone cannot achieve this. And at the forum, we often talk about the systems.
Yep.
The systems around an anchor, either infrastructure, idea, concept, whatever it may be. And you have to work through the system players, the system in terms of the levers that can really unlock the most value. So Hakrit, as the representative from the private sector and being involved in this initiative as one of the drivers of this, we talked a little bit about that backbone is not the only piece, that we need to think more broadly about how we connect it as an asset to the various work that others are doing. Could you speak to that quite a bit from your private sector experience, but also as an integral part of this initiative?
Thanks a lot. I think I would first like to thank Smart Africa and DG Rasina Kone to give us this opportunity and a platform to discuss this very important aspect to drive Africa to the fourth industrial revolution. And we came here last year, and we saw this name of the summit as Transform Africa Summit. And it is the genesis of our own company, which is Tata Communication Transformation Services. And we had an opportunity to meet with the Honorable Minister Diaby, and we started looking into how we can contribute from TCTS, Tata Communication Transformation Service perspective, and what all we can bring to the continent into this Pan-Africa integration. And Honorable Minister Diaby invited us on this flagship project for Intra Africa connectivity. And we worked with him tirelessly with the team sitting in Guinea. connecting and talking and communicating to lots and lots of ministers, regulators, trying to get the data for us to really understand what this connectivity will mean. And we launched that book after that effort, which is available for everyone to look at. And we also invited about 16, 17 countries last year in India to see the nerve center of one of the largest world operations, which is in India, which actually manages close to about 750,000 kilometers of fiber globally, subsea and inland. And to give a view, like beyond the infrastructure of creating these pipes under the earth, what all is needed on top to actually run an effective services to drive what we call as e-governments across Africa. So I think from that perspective, we defined different phases, and we are in the phase 1. And we had a interlock meeting with the Republic of Guinea, Sierra Leone, chaired by the DG Lucina Kone. And he said as part of the sub-phase, we will start looking into 2 borders and be part of that shining example to actually showcase and demonstrate that how a private sector can come with its knowledge, its expertise, its technology. And we have been largely involved in a major digital transformation in India and some of the lessons that we can bring forward. So as Minister Saware and Minister Diaby said, we're looking to get that first shining example in Africa connectivity done in the next 3 months. Okay. Now, I think once you look into the whole integration aspects of the backbone, yesterday our chairman gave a message in his keynote that besides that physical aspects of the infrastructure, we need a social and cultural integration as well. And we launched what we call as a circle of digital inclusion, where we will be working with Smart Africa and Minister Diaby to create a single large fiber ring. And we have asked the nations, countries to send a valuable part of their identity of a country. It could be cotton, it could be beans. So that can actually show a large-scale Pan-Africa integration as a symbolic reference that will be in Smart Africa headquarters, where we weave all of these resources or a context of a country. The second part, I think, as DG said, is we see a lot of disparity, what's happening in Africa in terms of connectivity. Okay? There is disparity in the way the technology is being used. There is disparity in the way the regulations have been formalized. There is a disparity, as we said, is the way the digital divide is. Okay, and we're trying to see what methods, both from a learning perspective, where we can help in creating the policy and advisory and consulting, plus also how this infrastructure can be accelerated in terms of development, and that's where we are bringing a lot of different technology innovations that we will be trialing in the next couple of months. And one of that innovation we're bringing is free space optical communication. So you don't need to go and physically lay the fibers, and you can actually set up a 10-kilometer, 20-kilometer link with about 10 gig, 20 gig of capacity within about a couple of hours. So one of the examples, just to talk about, was around that 50% of Africa population is just 25 kilometers, and that's the last mile we need to create. Okay, to achieve that, we are looking from a perspective how we help in building that platform, and we have called that platform as Digital Super Information Gateway, and it is just not about putting the fiber just in the backbone, but it extends to the regional districts, it extends to the last mile, and our thought process is like 100 to 100. So 100 to 100 means that we have 100 gig in the backbones, and we got 100 meg in the last mile. Because that level of broadband connectivity and that level of bandwidth and high speed is required to build up what we call as the digital platform to drive e-government services and all the application that needs to be there. So I think from that perspective, what we see as a private sector player, that we will come up with those kind of solutions that help in accessible, what we call a universal access or open access infrastructures, help in actually in an abundant bandwidth. So it's not like 2 meg or 4 meg links that actually people don't use much. And then also make sure that they're real-time browsing. You know, all these issues of content being localized and things can then be created by the people themselves. Okay, and then make it affordable. You know, you are talking about getting to a point, not immediately, but at least in next 2-3 years, driving like $2 or $3 a month of subscription of broadband services. Okay, and it is not mobile. You know, even the infrastructure of mobile in Africa is also limited by the way the fiber are laid, because only the very large players have a capacity to have 3G and 4G mobile telephony. But the tier 2, tier 3 operators are looking for infrastructure that they can share use. Okay? So how we build up the incentives within the government and the policies in the government that allows the shared use of the infrastructure that the governments can invest in. Because this digital infrastructure will be there for 20, 25 years.
So I want to talk a little bit about the incentives, because in order for these types of projects to go from one-off demonstration effects to being more ubiquitous, that the incentives have to be there, both the crowding in incentives, I think Honourable Ministers has mentioned, going beyond even Smart Africa's 26 members, because it is a continental approach, and ensuring we crowd in the right players. And I also see incentives within national governments for ICT ministers or the equivalent to have conversations with finance ministers and have conversations with the equivalent of budget and planning and get that political will across the board. There were conversations yesterday that talked about making sure that we were not converting the already converted, but engaging in a conversation about what a digital economy means, which is a crowding in of all of those types of partners. I wonder if I could get back to DG in what are the supportive mechanisms that you have seen that have worked in terms of crowding in those partners? What would you like to see from some of the partners represented and members represented here to engage in making these types of initiatives more ubiquitous across the board? And how can we engage with this initiative?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. To respond to that question, I'd like to come back to, we have to give a lot of gratitude to the private sector. Because we all sitting here, the private sector for infrastructure is the Tata Communication. I mean by private sector, which are the telecom operator. Because we got into this point, firstly because of them. Because they started, investing in the country, in continent, bringing first of all 2G. Even before the 2G, we had the GSM, then 2G, 3G, 4G. Then it got into a point. Of course, as the private sector, they will only invest in an area which is actually interested to them. In a populated, high-density area, urban area. So you see the challenges to answer to your question and incentive and so on and so forth. I need to actually paint the picture. In the typical country or a continent, the private sector, of course, they've done a tremendous work in bringing this technology into Africa. They're leading today the mobile technology. Typical government, they're now running mobile technology, technology and the mobile money. However, they are concentrated in a high-density area and leaving, for example, the rural area untapped or unconnected. Then that comes to the role of the government to make sure that when we talk about connectivity, it is a universal access. That led to the creations of universal access funds in many of our African countries, mainly to develop, to deploy fiber nationally in the area where private sector really typically don't go. Then from there, they sublease it to the operator to be able to serve that particular population. We are in this ecosystem together. I know private sector on the room here. Government is there. Government don't do things. As they say in French, l'État fait, l'État ne fait pas, l'État fait faire. So we have to move from the paradigm of the government doing it themselves to government doing it. That is the fundamental birth of the service industry. The government is here to set the law and the regulation and orientation where we're heading, then the private sector will do. Then digital transformation, we all talk about it. Why now? We fundamentally believe that in Africa, if the government do not take their responsibility into their hand and steer the boat to the appropriate directions, to the right orientations, we are not going to make it to the fourth industrial revolution. Because private sector, although they might be quite interesting in bringing high-tech stuff in Africa, but the majority of our African population will be left behind. So I'm really encouraging this partnership, private-public partnership, for the private sector to engage, because you don't have to look at a specific country, you have to look at the mass. In Africa today, Smart Africa organizations, alliance, is about 600 million plus population. As we are approaching our brothers in Nigeria and Ethiopia, which should be very soon, we are targeting about from 900 to 1 billion population. Imagine in 1 second, Africa has a possibility to create a billionaire every single day with a billion population. Look at our young people developing an application, of course, provided that the interconnectivity project is settled. Developing an application, setting an application in African context for $1 to 1 billion population. Aren't you creating a wealth? You're creating local champion. And that is the objective of Smart Africa, to move into a single digital market. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Minister Soare, I wanted to come back to you and also pose these two questions for you and Honourable Minister Mami as well. Around, we've launched these initiatives. They're bringing back results in particular ways. How can we maintain that momentum to the point that DG has said? We're looking at the regional representation from Smart Africa. There is the involvement of private sector, but ultimately, from a sovereign perspective, national governments are critical. And their sensitization or socialization to the overall long-term vision is paramount, is important. And they represent, you represent millions of people, like myself. I'm Nigerian, so I do hope that any way that we can support that effort there. I wanted to pose this to you to mention, to respond however you want around the role that other governments can play in this, and also how we can maintain both the momentum but also maintain the good work that's already been done.
Okay, thank you very much. We realize it is government's primary responsibility to ensure that you cater for the needs of your population. A year ago, when we took over the reins of government on the ICT platform, President Bill promised to improve the quality of service to the citizens. He promised to take ICT and broadband services to unserved and underserved rural communities, and he promised to do something about cost. This is something that fits into this intra-African connection paradigm. You now have a situation where you are no longer routing calls through Poland, like the chairman of Smart Africa, His Excellency Paul Kagame, said yesterday. You're talking straight to each other. That in itself is not only fulfilling, it reduces costs, because all the many inter-carrier agreements are no longer going to have a place. You are also talking about more effectiveness. Yeah, so that's the point. So what's the role of government in all of this? Like I said, it's government's primary obligation to provide services for its citizens. So on our front in Sierra Leone, and I know exists in many other countries, we just recently set up a Universal Access Development Fund, by which token each operator, all mobile network operators and internet service providers are now supposed to pay 0.75% of their gross earnings towards the operations of the Universal Access Fund, which is meant to take ICT and broadband services to unserved and underserved rural communities. It's important to note that telcos, MNOs, and ISPs are not necessarily fascinated by the same thing that fascinates government. Government is in the business to provide services. ICT, MNOs, and telcos are in the business to make profit. So there has to be a middle ground. Government has to be able to raise funds to encourage the very telcos or MNOs to take their services to otherwise unattractive locations. That is what we have done. That is one role of government in this. The other role has to do with creating the necessary enabling environment to ensure that there are policies, the legal regime supports the private sector intervention. So we are doing.
And are there specific policies that would really kind of unlock? Would there be that you have seen that would be? I want to get to, if I can, push a little bit on some of the practicalities of those policies, because as it relates, we had some conversations around. It seems you have a great partnership with the private sector. That's not necessarily the case across the continent. And so it may help in the conversation and also in the questions that come to, if you share some of those policies that you think would be, are that you're already engaging in. You've mentioned one with the Universal Access Funds, but any other specific policies that would be helpful?
Okay. You have a situation, for example, where we now have a platform where both the private sector and government relate. So what normally prevails as an adversarial relationship has been transformed into a cooperative and collaborative relationship. That forum provides an opportunity for both the private sector and government to sit and discuss current and emerging challenges in the sector. So by that token, there's a lot of trust. We walk the long journey together. The other bit has to do with regulations. For example, the telcos have been calling on government to review the Telecommunications Act, right? That is being reviewed to make it more predictable, to make it more consistent with what operates in other African countries that are considered models. This will engender trust and confidence in the system. They want greater predictability. Yeah. For example, we had a major mobile phone SIM card bust in Sierra Leone recently. We just realized the only regulation we had at the moment was the one regulating the registration of SIM cards. But for that, we would not have had that. They want greater clarity around fines, around regulations, so that it's not left to anybody's whims or caprices. You don't wake up one morning and evolve a new regulation, a new rule. So that is what we are doing now. But for this conference, we would have done a stakeholders validation, and that document would well have been on its way to Cabinet for ratification and begin its long journey through Parliament. So those are the practical nitty-gritties of what we are doing to ensure that we engender the trust and confidence of the private sector. So to you, the audience, let me use this opportunity to say, we want the private sector in Sierra Leone. We have an enabling environment to work with you. We want to drive universal access. We want to take ICT and broadband services president as chairperson of the investment board, so if you have any challenges, you can be sure that will be resolved in minutes or in seconds, just to ensure that you come in. We value your role. I can't wait to welcome you in Sierra Leone.
Thank you. Honourable Minister Mami, you also talked about both connecting that regional piece, the corridors of opportunities there that flow where people do flow. Goods and services are already moving. How do we get data to move? How do we get the value creation piece to move for telecommunications and broadband connectivity? If you would just speak to some of those pieces as well.
Thank you. I would like to look at this in two different perspectives. First, as a government, we need to know our population. Who are they? What are their needs? To have accurate statistics. Without accurate statistics, there is no planning. You can plan only if you have the accurate information. How many people you have in your country? Who are they? Where are they located? What are the needs? Once you have that, as a government, you set the goal, how to meet their needs, how to meet the requirement. Today, we are lucky in the continent. Our head of state, they have set the goal. They told us what they want. It's up to us, ministers, private sector players, to go on the ground, make things happen, and not to go back to head of state and tell them this is a problem. And to come to tell them this is what we have done for the betterment of our population, and this is what we are doing. Of course, I do agree that we need to tackle the legal and regulatory framework. But the legal and regulatory framework is what the private sector wants government to do. Mm-hmm. Each private sector player in our individual country, the first question is, what is your legal and regulatory framework? To attract investment, to increase the attractivity of our individual countries. Then, today, with regard to the interconnectivity, we have many statistics published by the World Bank, by other international statistic firms saying the traffic between African countries is this amount, the trade between African countries is this amount. But I'm sorry to say, those figures are wrong. Because there's no way for you to give accurate figure if you don't have real statistics. Who knows how many people crossing the border between Guinea and Sierra Leone every day? Who knows how many people crossing the border between Guinea and Mali every day?
Does anyone know?
No. And
I guess they've made your
even the traffic, where we can say it's easy, the data traffic, voice traffic between Guinea and Mali, Guinea and Sierra Leone, Guinea and Senegal, but you have different routes, and you have the fraud. So you may give what you think that is, this is the real traffic, but the fraud is difficult to know the amount of fraud. So we are always coming with, it may be this figure. Then today, what we're trying to do to make all this happen and sustainable, we concentrate our effort to bridge this gap between African countries, to interconnect, to lay down the transboundary links, interconnect countries. That will help us to see the traffic, how we can increase that traffic by reducing the cost, by increasing the quality and diversifying services. It's only if citizens are protected, they know that they can enjoy more service, better quality at a very low price, then you can sustain that infrastructure and you can strengthen the interconnectivity between the continent. And today, I think the goal is set by the head of state and government, and there's no contradiction. We are all committed within the continent. Smart Africa member state, no Smart Africa member state, we are all within the same region, same continent. We're willing to do so. And African private sector and non-African private sector interested in investing in Africa are with us, and the door is open Everyone is invited. Come, there are room for everyone. We want to do what our population is expecting us to do for the betterment of our population and to take forward our economy. We want to be competitive. And we do know, Dr. Amadou Toure used to say, I like to quote him and say, the only thing equally distributed in this world is the human brain. And we do have it.
And we have it in copious amounts, especially on the continent of Africa. I know we are running short on time, so I want to be the timekeeper in chief here, which I probably wasn't doing a very good job of. My apologies. I want to very briefly, because we had a conversation about this hackathon before I also introduce our speaker for the intervention, and want to be mindful of that, from Nigeria. So hopefully we can move that conversation forward. I'm a little biased. You had talked about this, the digital super information gateway, and it talks to some of these points around when we're thinking about the system. It is the information, the data that we need to have, the protocols and the policies and the learnings that need to be inculcated into this journey. If you could talk very, very, very briefly on this, because it's great to hear from private sector of how that's feeding into some of the constraints that the Honourable Ministers had mentioned, and also the opportunities.
Exactly. So as Honourable Minister Diaby said, the key is data and statistics. And how do you capture the data and statistics to really understand what are the needs of your population, where are they based, the demographics, and how they do the cross-border trade, or they move from one country to another is very important. But to collect all that data needs basic infrastructure. And on that basic infrastructure, the services of both voice and data needs to be harmoniously available. It should be ubiquitously available. Because if you take the Africa statistics, the 70% of the population is still in rural areas. Okay. So if they are not connected, so you're taking away almost about 700 million population out of the grid. And that's where the economy, and that's where the major part of a GDP growth of Africa stands. And what we have done as part of our internal study is that just connecting that population itself would add about $300 billion to the GDP of Africa. Okay. And that is just the start. You know, that is where you start with. Okay. But when you grow over the next 10, 15, 25 years, the dividend of the digital economy can be in trillions. Okay? And to enable that part of, as you rightly said, that by 2021, the economy will grow, the digital economy will grow to multiple trillions. But how do you make that population part of it? Okay, how do we, and then the question of policy, then the question of regulations will come. Okay. But the first thing is that we need to open the gates to get those people connected, to get on the grid. Okay? And then you start saying that, you know, how do I actually now start building the regulatory and the frameworks to actually get to a point where we can actually secure the data. We have data governance in there. Okay? But if you start with the policy and regulation to start with, we are actually hindering that level of accessibility. Okay? So what the point from a private sector is that building those gateways is important, and building those gateways to be fast and provide that connectivity is very important. Okay, so we are bringing solutions. As I said, is like we are bringing solutions. We are bringing knowledge that will enable us to build up these digital super information gateways, which we call as 100 to 100, to drive and to get those people first on that platform, the digital economy platform, and then you actually connect that platform across the national backbones, across all the 25 plus 9 other African countries, to build up the largest digital pipeline that can exist in Africa. And as you see, the data is the new oil. Okay, and once we have hold of the data, and you know the private operators, ISPs and all, are putting those data on the backbones through these gateways, and they're using a shared infrastructure on it, you have a very, you can say, progressive economy that will create the harmonization, that will create the prosperity, and also the job. And the main part of that, creating that digital platform, is about creating innovation entrepreneurship. Okay? So I think that is where we think that bringing up that level of bandwidth, and that level of affordable, accessible, abundant bandwidth is important to bring those people into the digital economy, reducing the digital divide, and then actually be part of the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you. So I would like to turn to, as we have in the tradition of Transform Africa, a special intervention presented by Senator Olabi Durojai, Chairman of the Nigerian Communications Commission. Thank you, sir.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm glad to be here today to make remarks at the Transform Africa Summit on the topic of Intra Africa backbone connectivity, an enabler to one African network, OAN. This being my first visit to Rwanda, I believe the authorities and entire people of Rwanda deserve applause for wisely turning their back on a painful past and bravely facing a future of progress and happiness. Very well done. Africa, although made up of emerging economies with huge human capital and a large advancement in communications technology, which define developed economies, infrastructure deficit remains the bane of Africa's quest for technological greatness. But hope is rising for Africa. Only yesterday, in this very hall, a spokesperson for Microsoft for Africa initiatives announced that the company has simultaneously opened 2 centers in Lagos and Nairobi, employing 250 youths at each center. It is said to be a $100 million investment. Africa needs more of this initiative. Another initiative worth considering is catching them young. I'm thinking of an African students exchange program to be inscribed in the curriculum of all African secondary schools, that it catch them in their early teen age, where students will study communication technology, ICT, and culture. I emphasize culture, which includes language, for a short period in another African country, once or twice in their school careers. The African Union, AU, through the new Partnership for African Development, NEPAD, prioritizes continental integration and infrastructure development to increase mobility, create employment opportunities, as well as improve the entire ecosystem for trade and socio-economic development. Its priority framework is the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PIDA, which addresses the infrastructures, the the infrastructure deficit that blights the continent's industrialization and international competitiveness with a strong focus on ICT infrastructure. The lack of political stability and continuity in government is a major challenge in sub-Saharan Africa, leading to obvious inadequate infrastructure in most sectors of the region. Today, it goes without saying that an information-rich environment and knowledge-based economy thrive on pervasive communications infrastructure. While infrastructure plays a key role in the availability, acceptability, and affordability of broadband and internet services, an enabling legal and regulatory environment for the development of ICT infrastructure is also very important. The One Africa Network initiative conceptualizes a framework where a mobile phone network should allow mobile phone users to use the services and to use the service across Africa direct. I emphasize direct, not to migrate to Europe, only to rebound back to Africa in a non-discriminatory manner. This will require collaborative sharing of infrastructure and will need innovative facilitation by critical stakeholders such as the AU, NEPAD, individual country regulators, and regional regulatory organizations to harmonize policy and regulation of electronic communication. The time is now for African policymakers to find new ways of doing things that align with current trends and declare access to ICT services as a fundamental human right. In Nigeria, the government has made efforts to stimulate information communication with the Nigerian National Broadband Plan, the NBP 2013 to 2018. We have now attained about 35% coverage and are pushing further still. To further deepen ICT penetration, the government also established a special fund called the Universal Service Provision Fund, USPF. Some of the panelists here refer to similar experiences in their own countries. Now, the USPF, with the sole mandate to extend ICT to rural, unserved, and underserved communities in Nigeria, and we have myriads of them. The Nigerian Communications Commission has also licensed a number of infrastructure companies, infracos, to provide fiber infrastructure in the 6 geopolitical zones of the country through the open access model, and to also drive broadband penetration. The NCC has also put forth procedures and modalities for implementing national roaming and active infrastructure sharing. If all countries within the region collectively adopt such plans or customize same to meet their national and regional needs, we all will be much closer to one network Africa, which is our goal. In conclusion, we as Africans should see ourselves as having passed the spoon-feeding level. We we should aim at producing and exporting more and importing less. As our host president, His Excellency Paul Kagame, said yesterday, we have had enough of first stopping at Dubai or Paris in our journey from Rwanda to Mali. Once again, I welcome you all to this session and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. So with the remaining time that we have, I want to throw it out to the audience. We'll take 3 questions and see where we are for time before going back to the panelists for their responses and also their closing remarks for about 1 minute each. So do we have a roving mic available? Okay, and I know we have a question there with the lady in the back. Unfortunately, with this light, I can't see everyone. Are there any more questions? There's one over there, the gentleman on my right. Is there one more question? And there's a gentleman I don't want to point at you, but there's a gentleman there, I see you. Please go ahead. We'll take 3 questions and have the panelists respond. And then if we have enough time, I'll take any more questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Hanan. I'm from the Impact Hub, Sudan. I would like to thank the minister from Nigeria. He said it all. Thank you very much, Minister. I hope in the room there is a representative from the AU and the Development Bank. I'm not a politician, so I'm going to put it straight. We know there is no issue and technology is available for a free conductivity for Africa. And in the last year, in the same Transform Africa, the gentleman put it bluntly. All what we need is a satellite that is going to provide Africa with free internet for all. My question is to His Excellency, Mr. Kony. Do you think Smart Africa can entertain the idea of bridging the gap between free conductivity for all and service providers? Are you ready to entertain the politics and the bridging the gap between free conductivity and the service providers? I thank you.
Thank you. There was the gentleman right there? Yeah. And there was, yes. Oh, okay. And
Good
also the
afternoon.
gentleman to the right.
My name is Jonathan Singman. I am from Rwanda. My question is how internet can help us to develop our infrastructure and industrial revolution in order to transform Africa.
Okay. Thank you. Next.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Michuki Mwangi. I work for the Internet Society. This is an issue that is very dear to us, and I feel that we've been not talking to the right people, if I could put it that way, because the issue of interconnecting Africa is something we've been speaking about for almost 10 years. We know we have what we call an internet transit deficit, meaning that we import more content than we create. That is why it is expensive for us. Secondly, if we compare the cost of backhaul, I'll give a country example. The cost of a 1 gig or 10 gig capacity between Abuja and Lagos versus Amsterdam and Paris. It is 1,000 euros Amsterdam, Paris. What is the cost between Abuja and Lagos?
And I want to get, just so that we're clear, do you have some questions
Yes.
related to that?
Yes. So the question here is, how can what do we need to do to fix the issue of capacity at national level and cross-border? Because that is a local issue that we need to address. But I would like to hear from the audience there, from the panelists rather, how can we resolve this?
Okay. And just to bring that together, there was a question directed to the DG just around the feasibility of free internet, bridging that gap between free internet and connectivity. How can we help, and how can the internet help to evolve or support infrastructure? And I think it's infrastructure more broadly, not just ICT. Possibly, okay. And from the gentleman from the Internet Society around this internet transit deficit, specifically around content. How do we develop more Africa-based content? And what do we need to do to achieve the kind of connectivity costs and affordability issue? Some of this has been mentioned in some of our discussions, but if there is any new pieces in relation to those questions. So starting with the DG and then more of the broader questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the sister from Sudan. The subject is about how to have a satellite in Africa to cover, well, to give internet free for everyone. I hate to see this, but there is no free lunch. If there is a free lunch, you are the lunch yourself. By saying that, let me be very clear. In the US, how San Francisco and Philadelphia, they were able to provide, how the municipality in those two cities, Philadelphia and San Francisco, were able to provide free internet, citywide Wi-Fi. Even the citywide Wi-Fi is not free.
It's embedded.
You know what it is? And I hate to say this. Every single one in this room, Facebook makes $16 off your head every year, whether you're on the Facebook or not. You know why? Data, to information, to knowledge, to wisdom. Collecting data mining. So, it is not a bad idea, but instead of saying free internet to everyone, I would say free internet to school. Everything starts with education. Poverty is bad, but uneducation is worse. Because education is the future. These are our future generation. Cabo Verde, they were able to give free Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi is not really free. Even when you come here, you access the hotel Wi-Fi free. It is not free. They're collecting data. You know, I don't want to make this so long, but because I wanted to talk about data governance. That's why Africa is wide open. Do we have a data policy? No. Do we have a regional, national, sub-regional, or continental law governing our data? No. If we don't do that, we can have a connectivity, we can have a policies, we can have a skills. If we don't have a law governing our data in Africa for data to stay in Africa, it's worthless. It's only when we do that, the investor is basically, we're making the bride beautiful. To attract investor, to come and install private and public data, even to give a free internet, we have to have laws. You see, Honorable Minister Jabi was saying something which is important. If you are facing a population, if you are a government, the population needs to be governed. If you're a company providing service to customer, you have customers, they need to be governed. The difference between the private and the public, one is the KYC, know your customer, the other one is the KYC, know your citizen. In those KYC, even when you put up free internet, you need to know It is not falling into the land of pornography, child abuse, pedophilia. There are cyber safety today. What is happening in New Zealand? We talk about a free world, free of speech. People who could never even meet a single president in their entire life, they will sit behind a computer and stream a video saying what they want. Has those service provider, GAFA, which is social service provider, social media service provider, have they done the real KYC? Who are you? And what do you do? And why do you want to stream? And what for? It's only when we do that, we will really benefit from the development of transformation, of digital transformation. And let's avoid copying whatever works in Europe or in North America to work in Africa, because we don't have a legacy. I won't be too long. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless I'll make sure that I'm honoring the other questions that were posed about the connection between and infrastructure, and then also the internet transit deficit that relates to content and data. If you have any thoughts to that, if you don't, it's okay as well.
I'm not sure I understand the question. He's talking about a deficit. For example, he's saying, what's the internet cost between Paris?
So there was an affordability function, and then there was also the traffic of content that is not developed within Africa, if I'm understanding, but it's coming into the continent.
Okay.
And that deficit.
Here's the big picture. We cannot say today that we don't have enough internet capacity on submarine cable to Africa. It's not true. Which is the capacity coming on the fiber on the submarine cable. Mm-hmm. We do have a capacity. But suppose you want to connect from Abuja to Nigeria to Lagos, mm-hmm. or from Lagos to Abuja. It's like when you compare that price compared to the wholesale price on submarine cable. I do have a submarine cable fiber provider here. I don't think I want to take that question, but there is a disparity. Why? I will explain something to you. 4 or 5 years ago, in Cote d'Ivoire specifically, I don't want to say, I will say country name, not a provider name, the submarine cable for STM1 means 155 megabit per second. It used to cost $80,000 a month. 155 megabit STM1. Today, 4 years ago, with the pressure, that time we only had SAT3, which is one cable. Now we have SAT3, we have ACE and WAX. The price dropped to 16,000.
Competition?
Yes. It's called Let the Market Decide. I will pass it on to Singh. I think he has more to say on that.
I think the way the disparity is there in the broadband prices in the continent, it's a function of demand, and it's a function of getting more and more data consumed. Mm-hmm. So when you put an investment in a submarine network and you are not actually carrying too much of data, the cost per bit is going to be high for you. Yeah. So I think that's where the inclusivity of getting the people there and getting the networks upgraded to 3G, 4G, and now the 5G, okay, will drive that level of adoption and the usage of data that will bring down the cost per bit and also bring up the bring down the disparity that exists between the Africa continent and the rest of it. So the question is just about getting and flooding those pipelines with huge terabytes of data. And that is what's going to bring down the cost and also provide what we need in terms of complete harmonized pricing across the different markets.
I don't want to put honourable ministers on a spot, and
yes,
I know that we're mindful of time.
I've got to be.
If you have some burning responses there.
I've got to say something by all means. My colleagues have raised very pertinent issues. For Africa, to enjoy her fair share of the global regional integration, we have to have a few building blocks in place. Colleagues have mentioned data protection and privacy laws. I think that is very critical. It's an important building block we need to put out there. Because once we do these regional interconnections, you are now putting the whole data out there, right? They will need to be protected. We will require special regulations as to how long you keep a customer's data and all of those things. At the moment, we are left to the mercy of the whole world, right? What they do with the data, what they don't do with it, like DG mentioned, is another matter. So that's an important consideration we must have. Talk about free internet, free Wi-Fi. Well, that is an ideal we should aspire to as a continent. We should aspire to it. It might not happen today or tomorrow, but it's good we take baby steps. I am all for school connectivity, which is becoming quite a major global concern. We will be ready to walk that walk with the rest of the world so that all our schools, all our institutions of higher learning and schools generally, all our hospitals and relevant government agencies are connected. But let us take baby steps. Even as we do that, I think, let me veer off a little bit and talk to the rest of the room here. I say Africa is ready to reap her fair share of the global investment, to lure back the global private sector to invest into the vast area of opportunities. My country, for example, Sierra Leone, has breathtaking potentials in many areas, from tourism, agriculture, and all of that. And apart from the other enablers, we are also fighting corruption head-on. We have commissions of inquiry going on. We have one of the most stringent anti-corruption regulations, and you have political will to fight and exercise corruption from our body politics. So again, let me re-echo our call for all of you potential investors to come to Africa, to come to Sierra Leone, because that is where a lot is happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you. That also sounds like a closing remark as well. I'm not sure.
Don't worry, I'll close.
Oh, you have enough? So I'm mindful of our time, and I'm going into the next session, so I do want to, Honourable Minister, if you have some responses to the questions, and then also I will, if I can kick it off with you with about a 30-second closing remark.
Okay, thank you. I just want to connect to what Lassina said about free internet. There's no free internet. There's free access to internet. Someone has to pay for it. I think municipality, government, or taxpayers are financing those services. It's like free school, healthcare, free access to school, free access to healthcare, but there's no free internet because someone is producing the content, someone is building the infrastructure, someone is financing that infrastructure to make sure that our population have access to that internet. And once you give free access to internet as a government, you need also to care about securing that internet, to know who is connecting to internet, to doing what, and so on. And coming back to the gentleman who was talking about internet supporting development of infrastructure, let not to be in a dilemma of chicken and egg. Before you give internet, you need first to build basic infrastructure. It's only when you have basic telecommunication infrastructure that you can give access to internet. Then, when you have access to internet, that internet can help to support other type of infrastructure like healthcare infrastructure, education, and so on. So it's a kind of, it's systemic. And talking about the costs, let's not forget where we are coming from. A few years back, there was no infrastructure. And where we have infrastructure, the cost was not affordable. Today, when we look at where we are coming from, we are moving fast, and costs are coming down. And our target is to make sure that when we achieve this interconnection between countries, within the countries first, between the countries, when we have the national internet exchange point, regional and continental internet point, when we have the domestic information, because today if you want to go to Google, if you don't have the cash, you go out of your country, you may go out of the continent and come back. And someone is the owner of that infrastructure and you need to pay for. So I think there's a systemic approach where we need to tackle all those things to make sure that we have our domestic infrastructure, interconnect those domestic infrastructure to make sure that we align cost reduction, quality improvement, and of course, development of content and security applied to it. To continue with the, I would like to say that, as we said during the, the last 2-3 days, we as ministers, we as Africans, before being minister, we are Africans. Every day, our goal, our target, our fight is to make sure that every single day we are adding something to the quality of life in this continent. Our fight, anything we are doing is for the betterment of our continent. And we want all Africans, all non-Africans, everyone to come and be part of this journey to transform positively this continent. There are many challenges that we're facing, but let's start somewhere, and I think we do have the energy and commitment.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I will be very strict here, 30 seconds, and I want you to focus on what is important to leave with the audience, and number two, what is the challenge? What is the challenge point you're going to give both the audience and yourselves? Mr. Singh, if I can go to you.
I think just quickly say that, coming back to what Minister Diaby said, there are no non-Africans. We are all Africans. As the oldest human species has been found in Africa, and we originate from there. So I think let's say that we are all Africans, And now coming from a perspective of the private sector and data, we are very encouraged. We have been in discussions with many ministers across countries, and also initiative which has been put as Smart Africa helps the private sector to actually what we call as, navigate through the different challenges we have, and we get a lot of advice to get it right. Okay. So from our side of things, we are really, it's very encouraging for us. We are working on this critical infrastructure needs, which is what we call as hard capabilities in a continent, in a country. But we are also thinking about how we build up the soft capabilities or the soft infrastructure, which is about bringing the skills necessary there. And as the chairman said yesterday, we are committed to actually getting 150 engineers, young engineers across Africa, working with the Smart Africa team. It's not about scholarship funds and all, but actually give them the real job creation skills and to actually integrate the aspects of the hard infrastructure and the aspects of the soft infrastructure and bring those people back in Africa to create that level of technology awareness, create that level of cultural harmonization, to build the infrastructure, the content, the services that will develop and transform Africa.
Thank you. So soft and hard infrastructure there. Honourable Minister Soare, what is your important point that you want to drive forward, and what is the challenge you are posing?
Yeah, we have zeroed in on human capital development in the last 1 year. So listening to Mr. Singh sounds music in my ears. To capacitate young Africans in the various spheres of ICT engineering so that they can return home and make meaningful contributions to the connectivity of those countries. I think that's very important. In that same regard, let me use this opportunity to call on anybody and everybody in the room who has something to share with our team as we embark on this long journey of interconnected Africa. So please feel free to come forward. We want to learn from you. We want to drink from your well of experience so that we can learn from your mistakes and ensure that this experiment gets off the ground in a big way. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure being here in Rwanda for the very first time.
Fantastic, and hopefully not your last at all.
Well, I haven't had time to savor what it looks like, but it's interesting being here.
DG, I will leave you just with your very short remarks before we wrap up.
30 seconds. The call I have is for private sector. The digital transformation history of Africa is being written. Let's join hand in hand, public and private together, and come and make this happen. Come and make this happen to build an affordable network for Africa, Intra Africa Connectivity Project. Come together with the regulatory to harness, not harness, and harmonize the regulatory issue, the framework in Africa, in order to build a digital society. We are not doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for our future generations. As you all know, what you do, how do you want to be, what you do, it means the legacy. How do you want to be remembered in life, which is the legacy? This is for the future generations. The medium age in Africa is about 25 years, I believe. And they were saying, I think, by 2050, 70% will be below what? Let's come and work together hand in hand. And that's the main reason of the platform of the Alliance for Smart Africa, partnering with the private sector, also working with the government to make that reality, that dream come true, which is transforming Africa into a single digital market. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we thank you all for joining us for this conversation. We wish we could have had more questions, but I'm sure that you can be able to ask those questions and share them offline. Thank you once again, Honourable Ministers, dear DG and Mr. Singh. Thank you very much for joining us on this panel and being so open and accommodating of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.